The World War One and Africa. Europe is on fire. Empires clash in a brutal conflict that will leave millions dead. But this war wasn't just fought by Europeans. Across Africa, young men were ripped from their villages and forced to fight and die for empires that saw them as little more than tools. Today, we uncover the hidden history of African soldiers in World War One and the lasting impact of their service in a war they did not start. World War One is often told as a European tragedy. We hear about the trenches of France, the battlefields of the Eastern Front, but rarely about Africa's role. Yet over 2 million African soldiers and laborers were conscripted by colonial powers: France, Britain, Germany, Belgium. Many were sent to European battlefields. Others fought in brutal African campaigns. But why? What did they gain? And what did colonial empires take from them? To understand Africa's role in World War One, we need to go back to the scramble for Africa. By the early 1900s, almost the entire continent was under European control, divided by lines drawn in Berlin in 1884, lines that ignored African nations and cultures. The colonies were not just about land, they were about resources, wealth, and labor. When war broke out in 1914, the same European powers turned to their African colonies for soldiers and workers to fuel their war machines. African soldiers were not given a choice. Many were conscripted, some through violent raids. The French called them tirailleurs sénégalais, but they came from across West Africa. The British recruited from East and West Africa, and the Germans forced Africans into their ranks, often using brutal coercion. These African soldiers were often thrown into the most dangerous battles. In France, African troops were used as shock battalions, sent in first to weaken enemy defenses. Why? Because colonial officers considered them expendable. But it wasn't just the battlefield. Africans were used as porters, carrying supplies across dangerous terrain, often dying from exhaustion, disease, and starvation. In the East African Campaign, an estimated 100,000 African porters perished, more than the number of soldiers who died in the region. Their deaths were largely undocumented, their stories erased. So why did Africans fight in this war? For many, they had no choice. Some were kidnapped, others were promised rewards that never came. Colonial propaganda painted it as a duty: fight for the empire, and you will be rewarded. But the reality was different. After the war, African veterans were cast aside. Promises of land, pensions, and rights were rarely fulfilled. Many returned home to find their communities struggling under increased colonial taxation. Their sacrifice was ignored. But these soldiers did not forget. Their experiences in World War I planted the seeds of resistance and nationalism. They had fought alongside Europeans, seen their weaknesses, and understood that colonial rule was not invincible. Many of the leaders of Africa's independence movements were former soldiers who had served in the world wars. So what do we learn from this history? World War I was not just a European tragedy, it was a global conflict fueled by imperialism, fought on the backs of colonized people. And in the end, Africa's involvement in the war helped spark the movements that would eventually break the chains of colonial rule. The story of African soldiers in World War I is a story of exploitation, resilience, and revolution. It's a history that must not be forgotten, because in the echoes of the past we find the struggles of the present. If you found this story compelling, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Untold Africa for more deep dives into untold history. What other forgotten stories do you think we should cover? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep questioning history.